my dad said, glass of Bordeaux in hand, 250 guests within earshot, at my own sister's wedding. I hadn't spoken to my family in 15 years. When Claire's invitation arrived, handwritten, tucked inside a plain envelope with no return address, I knew this wasn't just a wedding, it was a trial. What my father didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the bride was alive that day because of me. And before the night was over, I'd be saving another life at his table. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. My name is Evelyn Ouellette. I'm 37 years old, and I'm a Major General in the United States Air Force. Now let me take you back to a Saturday morning in October, the day I drove 3 hours to attend a wedding I almost didn't survive. The invitation sat on the passenger seat of my 12-year-old Ford, propped against a gas station coffee I'd picked up somewhere around Hartford. Claire's handwriting, small, careful, slanting slightly left the way it always had. Please come. I need you there. I drove with the windows cracked. October in Connecticut smells like wood smoke and dying leaves, and something about that particular combination took me straight back to the last time I stood on my father's porch. I was 22. My suitcase was on the steps before I was. He didn't throw it. He placed it there, deliberately, like a period at the end of a sentence. You made your choice. 3 words, 15 years ago. Still louder than anything I've ever heard through a cockpit headset. I pulled off Route 15 near Fairfield and sat in the breakdown lane for 3 full minutes. Checked my mirrors, checked my breathing, looked at my own eyes in the rear view. You've landed helicopters in sandstorms, I said out loud. You can walk into a wedding. The GPS said 7 minutes to Greenfield Country Club. I could see it before I arrived. Stone pillars at the entrance, a marble fountain, ivy climbing the facade like it was apologizing for the building's excess. A valet in a black vest waved me toward the front circle. I shook my head and parked in the overflow lot, 300 yards from the entrance, between a caterer's van and a gardener's truck. I didn't come to prove anything. I came because my sister asked. The welcome board stood inside the lobby on a gilded easel, a framed photo collage, white matting, silver script, the Ouellette family, established 1988. Every member was there, my father, his wife, Claire, various cousins, everyone except me. The year they'd chosen, 1988, was the year I was born, and somehow I'd still been edited out. To make sense of that welcome board, you'd need to go back to a kitchen table in Westport, Connecticut, 15 years earlier. I was 22, fresh out of a kinesiology degree, holding an acceptance letter from Air Force Officer Training School, like it was a winning lottery ticket. My father sat across from me at the breakfast bar of our 5-bedroom Tudor, the house he'd bought with 20 years of 16-hour days, building Ouellette Insurance Group from a 1-desk office in Bridgeport. I built this company so my daughters would never have to struggle, he said, and you want to fly helicopters. I told him I wanted to save people, that I'd watched my mother spend 3 years in hospitals, and I'd promised myself I'd learn how to pull people out of the worst moments of their lives. That selling homeowners policies in Fairfield County wasn't it for me. He took it personally. He took everything personally. My mother had died when I was 16. Cancer, the slow kind, the kind that lets you watch. My father married Margaret 2 years later. Margaret, who sat in the living room that morning and told Gerald, loud enough for me to hear, "Let her go, she'll come crawling back." She was wrong about that. My father changed the locks that afternoon, removed me from the family health insurance by the end of the week. Every photograph of me in that house disappeared within a month. I know because Claire told me, years later, in whispered phone calls Margaret didn't know about. I left with one suitcase, $1,100 in savings, and the clothes on my back. I didn't take a single thing from that house that I hadn't earned. From my old bedroom window on the second floor, Claire, 15 years old, still in braces, watched me go. She was crying. I could see her, and she could see me, and neither of us could do a thing about it. The cocktail hour was already underway when I stepped through the double doors. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, actual towers, the kind where the liquid cascades from glass to glass. String quartet playing Debussy in the corner, women in Armani and Diane von Furstenberg, men in custom suits that cost more than my first car. I'd bought my dress on sale. Navy blue, simple cut, no label worth mentioning. It fit well. That was enough. Heads turned. Whispers carried the way whispers do in high-ceilinged rooms, bouncing off marble and landing exactly where they're aimed. That's Gerald's other daughter, the one who left. I thought she was... Wasn't there some kind of falling out? A woman I vaguely recognized from childhood offered a tight smile and moved on before I could place her name. A man with a club pin on his lapel nodded at me, then immediately angled his body toward someone else. My father's social orbit had clear gravitational rules, and I was outside it. I found him across the room, at table 1 naturally. Silver hair swept back, Brioni suit, laughing with a thick-necked man I didn't recognize. Margaret stood beside him in a red dress, pearl necklace resting against her collarbone, one hand on Gerald's arm like she was anchoring a flag to a pole. I remembered what Margaret once told our neighbor, Mrs. Foley, at a 4th of July cookout. Claire had repeated it to me in a midnight phone call. Evelyn couldn't handle the real world, so she ran away to play soldier. I took a glass of Pinot Noir from a passing tray and found my table. Table 22, last one, by the kitchen door. My place card didn't read Evelyn Ouellette. It read Guest of the Bride. Table 1 had white roses and orchids. Table 22 had silk flowers. Not even good silk. The bartender, a kid in his 20s with kind eyes, caught me standing alone and poured a generous glass. "Whoever put you at table 22 doesn't know what they're missing," he said. I almost laughed. I heard her before I saw her, the rustle of tulle, the sharp click of heels moving faster than any bride should on her wedding day. "You came," Claire's voice cracked on the second word. "Oh God, you came." She hit me like a wave. Arms around my neck, face buried in my shoulder, the scent of jasmine perfume and hairspray, and something underneath that was just Claire. The little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. She was wearing Vera Wang, off-the-shoulder cathedral train, hand-sewn beading that caught the light like scattered stars. She was beautiful. She was also shaking. "Dad doesn't know I sent the invitation," she whispered, pulling back just enough to look at me. Her eyes were the same green as our mother's. Margaret found out and tried to stop it. I told her I'd cancel the entire reception if she interfered. "Claire, no, listen to me." She gripped both my hands. "I have something planned tonight. Trust me. Just stay. No matter what Dad says, please stay." I searched her face for an explanation, but she gave me none. There was something behind her eyes, not anxiety exactly, something closer to resolve. David appeared beside her, the groom, tall, steady-looking, with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need a loud room. He extended his hand. "Claire told me everything," he said. "It's an honor, Evelyn." Everything. The word snagged on something in my chest. What exactly had Claire told him? She squeezed my hands one last time. "You're the reason I'm standing here today, Ev. And tonight, everyone will know." Before I could ask what she meant, her maid of honor pulled her away for photos. I caught one last detail as she turned, the inside of her wedding band, where most brides engrave a date or initials. Claire's ring had a single word: Phoenix. It meant nothing to me then. It would mean everything by midnight. Gerald found me 17 minutes into cocktail hour. I'd been counting. He was holding a glass of something amber. Bourbon, probably. The Pappy Van Winkle he always favored at events. And he wasn't smiling. He crossed the room with the stride of a man who owns the building, even though he didn't. He just owned the people in it. No greeting, no handshake, no, "It's been a long time." I didn't realize Claire's guest list included charity cases. I set my wineglass down on the nearest high top. "Hello, Dad. You look well." "You have some nerve showing up here." His voice dropped to a register meant only for me, but his eyes scanned the room to make sure we had an audience. "If you embarrass this family tonight, I'll make sure Claire regrets inviting you." "I'm here for Claire, not for you." His jaw tightened. I'd forgotten how much he hated being dismissed. Margaret materialized at his elbow. She had a gift for that, appearing at the exact moment Gerald needed reinforcement. She wore a smile the way a guard dog wears a bow. "Oh, Evelyn, how unexpected." She pressed a hand to her chest. "I told Gerald someone from the charity list must have gotten mixed up with the invitations." I let the line land without flinching. Years of flight training teach you that. When turbulence hits, you don't jerk the controls. You hold steady and ride through. Gerald leaned closer. "Claire has a trust fund, an apartment on Chapel Street, her car, half this wedding. All of it runs through me." He paused, letting the math settle. "You want to test how far that goes?" There it was. The same playbook, 15 years later. Money as leash, love as currency, control disguised as generosity. 15 years and you still can't read a room," he said, straightening his Patek Philippe. "Some people just don't belong." He walked away. Margaret followed, heels clicking like punctuation. Margaret didn't leave me alone for long. 20 minutes later, she reappeared at my elbow and steered me, physically, hand on my back, toward a cluster of guests near the terrace doors. "Everyone, this is Gerald's older daughter." She gestured at me like I was a display piece. "She left the family years ago to, well, what is it you do again, dear? Something with planes?" "I'm in the Air Force." "Right." Margaret tilted her head with practiced sympathy. She always had trouble settling down. Some people need structure, you know? The group, 2 couples, country club polished, uncomfortable, offered thin smiles. Nobody spoke. In my father's social circle, contradicting his wife was like contradicting him, and nobody contradicted Gerald Ouellette at his own daughter's wedding. Margaret pressed on. She had a talent for asking questions that were actually statements. "And is there a husband, children, or is it still just you and the uniform?" "Just me and the uniform." I smiled. Let her have the line. It wasn't worth the fight. In the military, we call this hostile territory. The difference is, in hostile territory, at least they're honest about wanting you gone. One of the women, Patricia, slim, silver earrings, standing slightly behind a heavy-set man in a Tom Ford suit, glanced at my wrist. Her eyes lingered on my watch. It was a Marathon GSR, olive drab, built for search and rescue operations, water-resistant to 300 meters. It was worth about $400, which made it the cheapest timepiece in the room by a factor of 50. Patricia looked at the watch, then at me, then back at the watch. Something registered behind her eyes, a question she didn't ask. I filed that away. Margaret was already moving on, her Cartier bracelet catching the light, her Hermes clutch tucked under one arm like a small, expensive weapon. Gerald caught my arm in the hallway between the cocktail lounge and the ballroom. Not hard. Just firm enough to say I still decide when you stop walking. The corridor was empty. Oil paintings on the walls, brass sconce lighting, carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps. The kind of space designed to make ugly conversations look civilized. Let me be very clear. His voice had dropped the party register entirely. This was Boardroom Gerald. You are here because Claire is young and sentimental. The moment this reception ends, you disappear. Again. Claire is 30. She makes her own decisions. Claire's decisions are funded by my money. Her apartment, her car, half this wedding, mine. He held up a finger. You want to test how far that goes? I looked at him. Really looked. Same posture, same controlled expression, same absolute certainty that he was right about everything, always. The man hadn't changed in 15 years. He'd just gotten more expensive. And then he crossed a line that no amount of Brioni wool could disguise. Your mother, your real mother, would be ashamed of what you've become. The hallway went very quiet. My mother died when I was 16. She spent her last coherent afternoon telling me to chase whatever made me feel alive. She held my hand and said, "Promise me you won't live small, Evelyn." I promised. 3 weeks later, she was gone. And now my father was using her ghost as a weapon. My hands clenched. My vision narrowed. For one full second, the training dropped away, and I was just a daughter who missed her mom, standing in a hallway with a man who should have protected that memory instead of weaponizing it. 4 seconds in. Hold. 4 seconds out. Combat breathing. It works in cockpits. It works in hallways. You don't get to use Mom's name to hurt me. Not anymore. I turned and walked away. Behind me, his voice followed like a stone thrown at my back. You were always the weak one, Evelyn. That's why you ran. Dinner was called at 7. 250 guests filtered into the ballroom, round tables, white linens, Waterford crystal stemware catching candlelight in every direction. The band played something soft and classical as people found their seats. I found table 22, kitchen door at my back, silk flowers in front of me. 4 strangers already seated who offered the kind of polite smiles that said they'd heard Gerald's version of events. My father stood at the head table. He lifted his glass, Bordeaux, dark as a bruise, and tapped it with a fork. The room fell silent. Claire has always been my pride, he began. His voice carried the warmth of a man who'd practiced sincerity until it was indistinguishable from the real thing. She understood that family means loyalty. She understood that when you're given everything, you don't throw it away to chase some fantasy. He paused just long enough for the subtext to settle. A few guests glanced toward my corner of the room. Some quickly looked away. Others didn't bother being subtle. I raised my daughters to know their worth. Another pause. And Claire always knew hers. 250 people. And my father had just told every single one of them I was the daughter who didn't make it. I held my wine glass steady, took a sip, smiled at no one in particular. At table 1, Claire's knuckles were white around David's hand under the tablecloth. I could see her face from across the room, jaw set, eyes bright with something that looked like barely contained fury. She caught my gaze across the ballroom and gave the smallest nod. Wait, that nod said. I know what he just did, and it's almost time. I didn't know what she meant, but I stayed. So there I was. Table 22, plastic flowers, my father's speech still ringing in my ears. If you've ever sat at a dinner table where every word was a weapon disguised as a compliment, you know exactly what I'm talking about. My father had 250 people believing I was the family failure. But here's the thing about being underestimated. People stop watching what you're capable of. And what happened next? Nobody saw it coming. If this story is hitting close to home, hit subscribe, because we're just getting to the part that changed everything. Dinner was half finished when Margaret brought reinforcements. She crossed the ballroom with the thick-necked man I'd seen earlier. Richard Hale, I'd learn. Gerald's business partner, Margaret's older brother. The kind of man who measured his own importance by the square footage of his boat. Richard, this is Evelyn. Margaret's hand rested on his arm. Gerald's daughter who chose the military over the family business. Richard looked at me the way you'd look at a minor traffic accident. Briefly interesting, ultimately someone else's problem. Scotch in one hand, the other tucked in the pocket of his Tom Ford suit. A Rolex day-date caught the candlelight at his wrist. Military, huh? He took a sip. Good for you. Someone has to do it. I just prefer people who can actually build something, not just follow orders. The other guests at table 22 developed a sudden fascination with their entrees. Richard wasn't finished. What do they pay you anyway? 80, 90 a year? He swirled his scotch. I spend that on my boat. The pay is decent, I said. The work is rewarding. Margaret's smile sharpened. Rewarding? You mean like a participation trophy? They laughed together, Margaret and Richard, a choreographed performance that had Gerald's fingerprints all over it. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was a campaign. They were reinforcing the story my father had been telling for 15 years. Evelyn is the one who couldn't cut it. Evelyn is the cautionary tale. I looked down at my watch. The Marathon GSR. $400. Built for rescue operations in conditions that would kill a Rolex in 12 minutes. Richard caught me looking. Nice watch, he said. Very practical. No offense, sweetheart, but the real world doesn't run on salutes, he added, leaning back. It runs on balance sheets. I took a sip of wine and said nothing. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Not yet. Gerald arrived at table 22 as if on cue. The three of them now stood around my chair like a tribunal. Gerald on my left, Margaret behind me, Richard across the table, leaning forward on his elbows. I see you've met my business partner. Gerald clapped Richard's shoulder. Richard, Evelyn here thinks flying helicopters is a career. Hey, Richard shrugged. At least she's not asking for money, right? They laughed. I didn't. Patricia, Richard's wife, the woman who'd studied my watch during cocktails, sat 2 seats away. She frowned, a crease forming between her brows. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then pressed her lips together and looked down at her plate. Gerald pulled a chair beside mine and sat. His cologne was overpowering, something expensive and suffocating. He dropped his voice low enough to seem confidential, loud enough for the table to hear every word. You see all these people, Evelyn? Every one of them knows you're the daughter who abandoned her family, and you showing up doesn't change that. He straightened a cufflink. It just proves you're still looking for something you'll never get. I held his gaze. And what's that? My approval. The table went silent. Even Richard stopped drinking. My father wasn't wrong. Not entirely. There was a 22-year-old girl still living somewhere inside my chest who wanted exactly that. Her father's hand on her shoulder, his voice saying, I'm proud of you, Evelyn. She'd been waiting 15 years. She'd keep waiting. In rescue operations, the most dangerous moment isn't the storm. It's the second you let the storm decide for you. I set my wine glass down, looked my father in the eye, and said nothing. He waited for tears, for a raised voice, for the scene he could use to justify everything. I gave him silence. Silence unsettled Gerald more than any argument ever could. He couldn't let silence win. Gerald stood, pushed his chair back, and his voice climbed just enough, just past the boundary of private and into the range of 3 or 4 surrounding tables. If it wasn't for pity, no one would have invited you. The clink of silverware stopped. Conversations at nearby tables died mid-sentence. A waiter carrying a bread basket froze 3 steps from the kitchen door. At table 19, a woman put her hand over her mouth. At table 20, an older man in wire-frame glasses looked at Gerald and slowly shook his head. Margaret, standing behind me, didn't intervene. She touched Gerald's arm, the gesture of a woman who wanted to appear concerned while making sure the performance went on. Richard shifted his weight. "Gerald, come on," he murmured. But he didn't defend me. He just looked at his shoes. I lifted my wineglass, took a sip, and smiled. 15 years ago, those words would have broken me. I would have cried, grabbed my coat, driven home blinded by tears, and spent the next decade trying to convince myself it didn't matter. 15 years ago, I was 22 and terrified and alone. I wasn't 22 anymore. "Funny thing about pity," I said, just loud enough for our table. "The people who give it usually need it the most." Gerald stared at me. He'd expected tears. He'd expected surrender. My calm unnerved him more than anger would have. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. For the first time in 15 years, my father had nothing to say. I held his gaze, sipped my wine, let the moment land. From across the ballroom, I saw Claire rise from the head table. She leaned into David's ear. He nodded. She smoothed her dress, squared her shoulders, and began walking toward the stage, toward the microphone. My father had just delivered his closing argument. He didn't know the defense hadn't started yet. I excused myself before the entree plates were cleared. Nobody at table 22 protested. The ladies' room at Greenfield Country Club was nicer than most apartments I'd lived in during my 20s. Marble vanity, brass fixtures, hand towels folded into fans, a basket of Aesop products arranged like a still life. I locked the door, leaned against it, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red, dry but red. 15 years of military discipline meant the tears didn't fall. They collected somewhere deeper, in a place I didn't visit unless I was alone and the door was locked. I looked at my hands. The right one carried a scar across the knuckles, a souvenir from pulling a crew chief out of a shattered fuselage in Bagram, Afghanistan, 6 years ago. Hydraulic metal had torn through my flight glove. I'd barely noticed until the medic pointed out I was bleeding. Those hands had saved people. Tonight, they were shaking. I thought about leaving. My keys were in my clutch. 30 steps to the parking lot. 3 hours back to my apartment near Patrick Space Force Base. I could be on I-95 before anyone noticed the empty chair at table 22. Why did I come? What did I think would happen? That he'd see me, 15 years older, and say I'm sorry? I thought about my officer training school graduation. I'd scanned the crowd 4 times, certain my father would be in the back row, that the anger had passed, that he'd show up the way fathers do. The seat stayed empty. Afterward, my drill instructor pinned the gold bar on my shoulder and said, "Your family's lost, Lieutenant. I've pulled soldiers from burning aircraft. I've landed in 0 visibility. But my father's voice in a banquet hall, that's the turbulence I've never trained for." My phone buzzed against the marble countertop. A text from Colonel Diane Webb, my commanding officer, my mentor, the woman who taught me to fly night missions over the Hindu Kush when I was 26 and still flinching at every shadow. "Heard you're at that wedding. Remember who you are, General. We're proud of you." I read it twice. Diane Webb had been a captain when I was a lieutenant. She'd written every recommendation letter that moved me from cockpit to command. She'd called me at 2 in the morning after my first combat rescue and said, "You did good, Willette. Now get some sleep. You've earned it. She didn't know my father. She knew what mattered. That I showed up, that I flew, that when someone was drowning or burning or bleeding, I was the one in the helicopter. I looked at the mirror again. Same eyes, same scar on my knuckles, same woman. 4 seconds in, hold 4. 4 seconds out. Box breathing. The same technique I used at 12,000 feet when the instruments went dark. My father measured success in square footage and a Patek Philippe. My success was measured in lives saved. 237 of them, at last count. I straightened my hair, adjusted the neckline of my dress, washed the redness from my eyes with cold water. I am not the girl he kicked out 15 years ago. I am Major General Evelyn Ouellette, and I don't leave missions unfinished. I opened the door and walked back toward the ballroom. Not because my father might apologize. He wouldn't. Not because the evening might improve. It probably wouldn't. Because Claire asked me to stay. And in 15 years of service, I've never once abandoned someone who asked for my help. Gerald noticed my return. I could tell by the small, satisfied twitch at the corner of his mouth, the expression of a man who believed he'd won. He whispered something to Margaret. She covered her smile with her wineglass. I imagined the narrative forming in real time. See? She went to the bathroom to cry. She's fragile. She always was. Let them think that. I sat down at table 22 and placed my napkin across my lap with the kind of deliberate precision that comes from years of mess hall etiquette drilled into you by senior officers who believed civilized meals built civilized leaders. I picked up my fork, took a bite of the salmon. It was actually quite good. Something had shifted, and the people around me could feel it, even if they couldn't name it. I wasn't slumped. I wasn't avoiding eye contact. I was sitting the way I sit in a command briefing, spine straight, shoulders level, chin parallel to the ground. This wasn't etiquette. It was posture built by 15 years of standing in front of colonels and brigadier generals and senators who could end your career with a phone call. At the next table, an older man watched me. White hair, trimmed mustache, the kind of tan you get from years of outdoor work. He sat upright in a way that echoed my own, a posture civilians don't carry. He studied me for a long moment, then leaned toward the woman beside him. Watch her, Dorothy. His voice was low but carried. That's Officer Baring, and not low rank either. I didn't hear him say it. I wouldn't learn about Thomas Brennan until later. But something in his expression, when our eyes met briefly, a nod, slight and knowing, told me I wasn't entirely alone in this room. Not every ally announces themselves. Some just recognize the uniform, even when you're not wearing it. Thomas Brennan waited until Gerald's group had migrated back to Table 1 before he approached. He was 68, maybe 70. Hard to tell with men who've spent decades on flight lines and runways. Broad-shouldered, deliberate movements, the kind of handshake that said he'd spent his career gripping throttles and saluting flags. Thomas Brennan, he said, pulling out the empty chair beside me. Retired Colonel, Air Mobility Command, 28 years. Evelyn Ouellette. He sat down, and his eyes went straight to my wrist. That's a Marathon GSAR. It wasn't a question. Rescue wing? I felt something loosen in my chest, the small involuntary relief of being recognized by someone who speaks your language. You know your watches, Colonel. I know my people. He folded his hands on the table, the way officers do when they're choosing their next words carefully. And whoever seated you at table 22 made a serious miscalculation. We talked for 4 minutes. He didn't ask my rank directly. That would have been forward, even by military standards. But I noticed the shift in his register midway through the conversation. He stopped calling me Miss Ouellette. He started calling me ma'am. In the Air Force, that word carries weight. A retired colonel doesn't call you ma'am unless he believes you outrank him. He stood, extended his hand, firm grip, eye contact, 3-second hold, military handshake, the kind you give to someone who's earned the same calluses you have. I don't know your rank, and you don't have to tell me, he said quietly, but I know enough to say this table doesn't suit you, ma'am. He returned to his seat. Dorothy, his wife, glanced at me with a look that was equal parts curiosity and respect. I turned my watch over on my wrist. On the back, beneath the serial number, a small engraving, USAF. Thomas had seen it, and he understood exactly what it meant. The maid of honor speech came between the entree and dessert. Rebecca Caldwell, 29, Claire's college roommate, polished in the way bridesmaids are polished when they've rehearsed their toast 14 times in front of a bathroom mirror, stood at the small stage with a champagne flute trembling slightly in her right hand. She told the usual stories. How Claire burned pancakes during freshman year. How she'd adopted a stray cat that turned out to be pregnant. How she'd once driven 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring Rebecca soup during a breakup. Then Rebecca's voice changed. 7 years ago, I almost lost Claire. The room went still. She drove off Millstone Bridge in a rainstorm. Her car went over the guardrail and into the river. Rebecca paused, steadying herself. She was trapped underwater for 11 minutes. Her lungs filled. She stopped breathing. At table 1, Gerald looked down at his plate. He knew about the accident. Of course he did. But it was the kind of thing he never discussed. It happened after he'd already cut me out. It happened in a world where I no longer existed to him. A military rescue helicopter was dispatched, Rebecca continued. The pilot didn't wait for the dive team. She jumped into the river herself, pulled Claire out with her own hands. Claire had no pulse for 2 minutes. That pilot performed CPR on the riverbank, in the rain, alone, until Claire started breathing again. Rebecca looked up. I don't know who that pilot was, but Claire does, and she told me something I'll never forget. That pilot is the reason she's alive to marry David today. My heart was hammering. The radio frequency from that night flashed through my memory like a strobe. Survivor trapped in submerged vehicle, Millstone Bridge, 2,300 hours. I hadn't known it was Claire. Not until I'd pulled her out of the water and seen her face in the floodlight. She knows. Claire knows it was me. What I didn't understand was how, or how much. David found me during the dessert shuffle, that 10-minute window when half the guests are at the cake table and the other half are refilling drinks. He slid into the chair next to mine with the ease of a man who'd been planning this moment. I only have a minute, he said, keeping his voice below the music. Claire's been planning this for 6 months. Planning what? He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a document, and angled the screen toward me. I recognized the letterhead before I read a single word. Department of the Air Force, FOIA response. 2 years ago, Claire filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the rescue mission report from Millstone Bridge. David spoke calmly, the way software engineers explain complex problems, step by step, no wasted words. The Air Force redacted most of it, but the pilot's name cleared review. Captain Evelyn Ouellette. My rank at the time. My name. On a government document, verified by the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center. When she read that name, David said, she collapsed. She'd spent 5 years not knowing who pulled her out of that river, and it was her own sister. I couldn't speak. The salmon sat in my stomach like a stone. She tracked everything after that, Evelyn. Every article, every promotion. She knows your current rank. She knows about the Distinguished Flying Cross. She delayed our wedding 6 months to match your leave schedule. He paused. She tracked your deployment through a friend at the Department of Defense. Why didn't she just call me? David's expression hardened. She tried. Margaret blocked every number Claire used, changed the house phone, even intercepted a letter. So there it was, 15 years of silence, and half of it had been manufactured. When Claire takes the mic tonight, David said, standing, just be ready. He squeezed my shoulder, brief, warm, respectful, and walked back toward the head table. David's words sent me back 7 years to a cockpit I could still feel around me if I closed my eyes. 2,300 hours. Rain hitting the windscreen of the HH-60 Pavehawk so hard the wipers were useless. My co-pilot, Lieutenant Graham, reading coordinates off the GPS while our pararescueman checked his harness in the cabin behind us. Dispatch. Civilian vehicle off Millstone Bridge, submerged in 8 feet of water. Driver trapped. Local fire responding, but no dive team on scene for 20 minutes. 20 minutes was too long. Water temperature, 41 degrees. Survival window with submerged lungs, 6, maybe 7 minutes. I made the call. I unclipped my flight vest, handed control to Graham, and jumped. The water was black and freezing and tasted like diesel. I found the car by feel, passenger window shattered, current pushing debris against the frame. I reached inside, found a shoulder, an arm, a seatbelt, jammed. I pulled my rescue knife and cut the strap. I dragged the body to the surface and kicked toward the bank, laid her on the mud, tilted her head back, checked for breathing. Nothing. Checked for pulse. Nothing. I started compressions. 30 pushes, 2 breaths. 30 pushes, 2 breaths. The rain was in my eyes. My hands were numb. I counted out loud because counting kept me focused, and focused kept her alive. On the 3rd cycle, the floodlight from the helicopter swept across us, and I saw her face for the first time. Claire. I didn't freeze. Training doesn't let you freeze. But something inside me cracked. A fissure that ran from my sternum to my spine, and I have never fully repaired it. She coughed at 2 minutes and 14 seconds. The most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I saved 237 people in my career. Claire was number 112. The only one I cried for. I never told anyone. I filed my report. Captain Evelyn Ouellette, mission number 4471-RC, and flew the next morning. That's the job. You don't use rescues as leverage. You don't trade saved lives for family reconciliation. You just fly. She was number 112, and for 7 years I never told a soul. I kept flying, kept pulling strangers from wreckage, kept pretending that one rescue didn't rearrange something fundamental inside me. If you've ever done something extraordinary for someone who never knew, or someone who did know but couldn't say thank you, drop silent hero in the comments. Now, back to that country club, because Claire had the microphone. And she was about to blow the roof off my father's carefully constructed lie. The band stopped playing at 9:15. Claire stood on the small stage at the front of the ballroom, spotlight angling down on her Vera Wang like she'd been placed there by a cinematographer. The microphone trembled slightly in her hand, the only sign that the woman up there was terrified. "Before we cut the cake," she said, "I need to do something I should have done years ago." Gerald at table 1 straightened his tie and leaned back with the satisfied posture of a man expecting tribute. Margaret put a hand on his arm and beamed. Their daughter, thanking her father in front of 250 guests. The natural order of things. Most brides thank their parents for raising them, Claire continued. Her voice was steadier now, finding its footing. I will thank my father. but not for the reasons he expects. Gerald's smile held, but something around his eyes shifted, a flicker of uncertainty he couldn't quite suppress. Claire looked out across the tables, searching. Her gaze swept past the champagne towers, past the centerpieces, past the clusters of guests with their coffee cups and cake forks, until she found me. Table 22, kitchen door at my back, silk flowers in front of me. I want to honor someone who made this day possible, she said, eyes locked on mine. Someone in this room who most of you don't know. Someone my family tried to erase. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. Gerald's jaw tightened. Margaret's hand tightened on his arm. Daddy, you taught me loyalty, Claire said, still looking at me. But you taught my sister something more important. You taught her that some people are worth saving, even when they don't save you back. Her voice broke on the last word. I need to tell you about the night I almost died. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the kitchen staff stop washing dishes behind me. 7 years ago, Claire said, I drove off Millstone Bridge in a rainstorm. My car sank in the Connecticut River. I was trapped underwater for 11 minutes. My lungs filled with water. I stopped breathing. She wasn't reading from notes. She knew every word by heart. A helicopter came, a military rescue helicopter, and the pilot, she didn't wait for the dive team. Claire's voice cracked, steadied, pressed on. She jumped into the river herself, into 41-degree water in the dark. She pulled me out with her own hands. At table 1, Gerald stared at his daughter. His face had gone very still, the expression of a man watching a building collapse in slow motion. I had no pulse for 2 minutes, Claire said. She performed CPR on the riverbank, in the rain, alone. She saved my life. 250 people held their breath. For 5 years, I didn't know who she was. The Air Force wouldn't release the pilot's name. Operational security. Claire reached behind the podium and produced a craft paper envelope. She held it up so the room could see the letterhead. Department of the Air Force. Freedom of Information Act response. 2 years ago, I filed a FOIA request, and I got this letter. She opened the envelope, held the document at arm's length so the official seal was visible even from the back tables. The pilot's name was Captain Evelyn Ouellette. She looked at me. My sister. The gasp moved through the room like a physical wave, table by table, breath by breath. A woman at table 8 covered her mouth. A man at table 14 gripped his wife's hand. Gerald stood perfectly still, mouth open, no sound coming out. Margaret's hand fell from his arm. My father kicked out the woman who saved my life, Claire said, and for 15 years she never said a word about it. Claire wasn't finished. After the rescue, Evelyn kept serving. Her voice had found something beyond steadiness now, a resonance that filled the room the way certain truths do when they've been held too long. She kept flying. She kept saving people. She looked down at a printed page. I could see the USAF seal from across the room, the blue and white letterhead of an official biography. Major General Evelyn Ouellette. Claire read each word like it was a declaration of war against every lie our father had ever told. Commander, 920th Rescue Wing, Patrick Space Force Base, Florida. Recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and the Humanitarian Service Medal. She lowered the paper. 237 confirmed rescues. The number landed like a detonation. I heard someone whisper, 237? And the question echoed outward until it became a murmur, then a rumble. Claire turned to face me across the ballroom. She stood straight, straighter than I'd ever seen her stand. She lifted her right hand to her forehead. To Major General Evelyn Ouellette, the bravest person I know. and the best sister I could ever have. The salute was imperfect. Her fingers were slightly spread, her angle too steep. A civilian's attempt at something she'd only seen in movies. It didn't matter. It was the most precise gesture I'd ever witnessed. I stood, slowly. The chair scraped against the floor and 250 heads turned to table 22. Silence. Then Thomas Brennan pushed back his chair and rose. His salute was textbook, crisp, exact, 30 years of muscle memory in a single motion. His wife Dorothy stood beside him. A man at table 12, another veteran I'd later learn, stood next. Then another. Then another. The applause began with a single pair of hands and spread like a lit fuse across the room. People stood, one by one, then in clusters, until the entire ballroom was on its feet. I've received medals from generals. I've been saluted by colonels. Nothing in my career has ever meant more than my little sister, in her wedding dress, saluting me from a stage. Gerald stood in the middle of the standing ovation like a man caught in a riptide. His face had gone the color of old chalk. 250 people, his friends, his business partners, his neighbors, his church congregation, had just learned that he'd disowned a major general, a war hero, the woman who'd pulled his own daughter from a river. Margaret tried first. She leaned toward the nearest guest and offered a shaky smile. Gerald always supported Evelyn in his own way. Nobody turned to look at her. Nobody cared. Richard Hale stood at the edge of the room with his scotch suspended halfway to his mouth. The word military welfare hung in the air like a stain he couldn't wipe clean. He'd said it 40 minutes ago. It might as well have been branded on his forehead. The social physics of the room had inverted in 90 seconds. The people who'd avoided me during cocktail hour were now stepping toward my table. The people who'd whispered behind Gerald's protective orbit were now whispering about him. Gerald tried to regain control. He half stood, cleared his throat. Claire, this is hardly the place. The applause drowned him out. He wasn't accustomed to being drowned out. Thomas Brennan walked to my table, extended his hand, and gripped mine with both of his. It's an honor, General. Then he turned to my father, still standing, still chalk white, still holding a glass of Bordeaux he'd forgotten he was holding. Sir, I served 28 years in the United States Air Force. I've met 5 major generals in my career. Thomas's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd spent 3 decades giving orders. Your daughter is the youngest woman to hold that rank in Air Force Rescue. He paused. And you put her at table 22. Gerald's survival instinct kicked in, the same instinct that had built a regional insurance company from a one-desk office. When the ground shifts, you deny the earthquake. Major General? He forced a laugh that convinced no one. Please. She probably inflated her resume. She was always good at exaggerating. David had been waiting for exactly that. He walked to the side of the stage, opened a laptop he'd placed there earlier in the evening, before the ceremony, before the cocktails, before Gerald had even arrived, and connected it to the venue's projector. The screen behind the cake table filled with light. U.S. Air Force official biography, the USAF seal in the upper left, and a photograph, me, in full dress uniform, 2 stars on each shoulder, standing in front of an HH-60 Pave Hawk with the 920th Rescue Wing insignia painted on the tail. David read from the screen with the calm precision of a man who'd rehearsed this 6 times. Major General Evelyn R. Ouellette, Commander, 920th Rescue Wing, Patrick Space Force Base, Florida. He scrolled down. Distinguished Flying Cross Citation. For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, Captain Ouellette personally entered a submerged vehicle to extract a civilian survivor under extreme conditions, performing life-saving resuscitation on scene despite hypothermic exposure and 0 visibility. Gerald stared at the screen. His own daughter's face, my face, 20 feet tall, 2 stars shining under ballroom lights. Margaret touched his arm. "Gerald, let's go." He pulled away from her. He didn't move. He just stared. At a table near the bar, a man I recognized from Gerald's business circle, someone who'd shaken my father's hand during cocktails, turned to the woman beside him and said, loud enough to carry, "He kicked out a 2-star general? I wouldn't kick out a 2-star anything." Gerald had nothing left to say. The evidence was public record. It was on the screen. It was a fact. And my father had spent 15 years building his case on fiction. Fiction doesn't survive contact with a FOIA request. What happened next wasn't in anyone's plan. Richard Hale had been standing near table 1, gripping his Scotch glass with both hands, face flushed from alcohol and humiliation. His jaw worked silently. Sweat beaded along his hairline. He tugged at his collar. Then he dropped the glass. It shattered on the marble floor. Waterford crystal, $200 in shards. And Richard's hand went to his chest. His face drained from red to gray in the space of a single breath. His knees buckled. He collapsed sideways, pulling the tablecloth with him, sending a centerpiece of white roses crashing to the ground. Patricia screamed. Margaret screamed. The room erupted into chaos, chairs scraping, guests shouting, a waiter calling for the manager. I was already moving. I'd crossed 20 feet of ballroom floor before my conscious mind finished processing what my training had already identified. Male, 60s, acute onset chest clutch, loss of consciousness, collapse, probable cardiac arrest. I dropped to my knees beside Richard, tilted his head back, checked his airway, put 2 fingers on his carotid. Nothing. No pulse. No breath. "Somebody call 911. Now." My voice came out in command register. Not the voice of a wedding guest. Not the voice of Gerald's forgotten daughter. The voice of a woman who'd spent 15 years pulling people out of the worst moments of their lives. I positioned my hands, locked my elbows, started compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. I counted aloud, hitting the sternum at 110 beats per minute. The textbook rate. The rate I'd drilled 1,000 times in advanced cardiac life support recertification. "Is there an AED in this building?" I called between compressions. A staff member in a black vest sprinted toward the lobby. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The man who'd called me military welfare less than an hour ago had no pulse, and the only thing between him and death was a pair of military-trained hands. The AED arrived. I tore open the pads, placed them on his chest. Clear. Shock. His body jerked. The monitor beeped once, then flatlined. Still nothing. I didn't hesitate. 30 more compressions. 2 more breaths. The crowd had formed a wide circle, silent now, the panic replaced by the kind of helpless stillness that occurs when people realize they're watching someone die. I repositioned the AED pads, checked the rhythm on the monitor. Ventricular fibrillation. Shockable. Clear. I hit the button. Richard's chest rose and fell with the jolt. Beep, beep, beep. Sinus rhythm. Weak, but present. Richard coughed. A wet, ragged sound, and his eyelids fluttered. I rolled him onto his side, into recovery position, and placed my hand on his shoulder to keep him stable. "Stay still, Richard. You're okay. Paramedics are coming." The room was absolutely silent. 250 people, not a single sound except the beep of the AED monitor and Richard Hale's labored breathing. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes after the 911 call. 2 EMTs and a medic with a stretcher. They assessed Richard quickly, vitals stabilizing, consciousness returning. The lead paramedic looked at me, kneeling on the marble in a cocktail dress, hands still positioned for compressions. Whoever started CPR saved this man's life. Textbook response. He paused. Are you a medical professional? Advanced Cardiac Life Support Certified. Air Force Combat Medic Training. He nodded, the way professionals nod at other professionals. They loaded Richard onto the stretcher. As they lifted him, he turned his head. His eyes found me. The man who'd spent an hour mocking the military was looking at the military-trained woman who'd just restarted his heart. His face crumpled. I'm sorry, he whispered. His voice was barely there. For what I said. I'm so sorry. Margaret stood beside the stretcher, mascara streaked, watching her brother cry. She looked at me. The contempt was gone. In its place was something she probably couldn't name. Gerald stood 5 feet away, arms at his sides, mouth open. 15 years of narrative, gone in 6 minutes of CPR. Don't apologize, I told Richard. Just breathe. That's all that matters right now. The paramedics wheeled Richard out through the service entrance. The ballroom lights seemed brighter now, or maybe I was just seeing more clearly. My dress had a crease at the knee from kneeling. My hands were still warm from compressions. 250 people stared at me. Claire appeared at my side and held out the microphone. I shook my head once. She pressed it into my hand and whispered, "Please." I looked at the mic. I'm not a speaker. I'm a pilot. I give orders over radio frequencies and briefing rooms, not ballrooms. But Claire's face told me this wasn't about speeches. I took the microphone. I didn't come here tonight for recognition. My voice was steadier than I expected. I came because my sister invited me. The room listened. I've spent 15 years serving people I've never met, pulling them from water, from fire, from wreckage. I would have served my family too, if they'd let me. I found Gerald in the crowd. He hadn't moved from his spot near table 1. His Bordeaux sat untouched. His Brioni suit looked like it belonged to someone else. Dad, I forgive you. I held his gaze. Not because you've asked, but because I need to. Carrying resentment doesn't suit me. It never did. He blinked, said nothing. But I want you to understand something. I didn't fail. I chose differently, and that choice has saved 237 lives, including your daughter's. I set the microphone on the nearest table, didn't linger, didn't wait for a response. I don't need your approval to know my worth, I said, without the mic now, just my voice in a quiet room. But I do hope, for Claire's sake, that one day you'll learn to measure people by what they give, not what they owe you. The ovation was louder this time, longer. Gerald stood in the center of it, surrounded by applause, and didn't clap once. What happens when 250 people recalibrate at the same time isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's a shift in foot traffic, the direction people drift when they're choosing who to talk to. They drifted toward table 22. A woman from the country club set pressed my hand and said she'd had no idea. A couple from Gerald's church told me their son had served in the Marines. A teenager with braces asked if I'd really flown helicopters in sandstorms, and for the first time all night, I laughed. Thomas Brennan introduced me to a man named Hamilton Reed, silver-haired, firm handshake, the kind of calm that comes from running large organizations. He was chairman of the Veterans Charitable Foundation, a nonprofit based in Hartford. General, we've been looking for an honorary chair for our annual gala, Hamilton said. Someone with operational experience and, frankly, the kind of integrity this room just witnessed. Would you consider it? I'd be honored. Thank you. Across the room, Gerald stood in the corner that used to be his stage. His business associates, the men who'd laughed at his jokes during cocktails, who'd nodded along during his toast, now kept a careful distance. One of them, a man in wireframe glasses I'd seen at table 20, pulled Gerald aside. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Gerald's face. Whatever was said, it wasn't congratulations. Margaret sat alone at the head table, makeup ruined, staring at the tablecloth. The narrative she'd spent a decade constructing, Evelyn the failure, Evelyn the runaway, Evelyn who plays soldier, had dissolved in 30 minutes. Patricia Hale found me near the bar. Her eyes were red. "Thank you for saving my husband." She gripped my hand with both of hers. "And I'm sorry for all of it." For the first time all evening, Gerald Ouellette was seated at the metaphorical table 22, and nobody was coming to keep him company. The evening wound down the way wedding receptions do, slowly, then all at once. Guests trickled toward the valet stand. The band played one last slow song. Caterers began clearing tables. I stepped onto the terrace. The October air hit my face like cold water, clean, sharp, smelling of fallen leaves and the last of someone's cigar smoke. Connecticut in autumn, the season that feels like an ending and a beginning at the same time. I heard him before I saw him. Gerald stepped through the terrace doors alone. No Margaret on his arm, no Richard at his flank, no audience. Just a 64-year-old man in a suit that suddenly seemed too large for him. He stood beside me at the stone railing, looking out at the dark lawn. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The fountain gurgled below us. A car door slammed in the parking lot. I was wrong. 3 words. 20 seconds of silence before them. He said them the way men like my father say things they've never said before. Quietly, stiffly, as if each syllable cost him something he'd been hoarding for years. "I know," I said. He gripped the railing. His knuckles went white. "Your mother, your real mother. She would have been proud." His voice broke on proud, not theatrically, just a hairline fracture in the register, the sound of a foundation shifting after too many years of pressure. "She would have been proud of both of us, Dad, if we'd given her the chance." He was quiet again. The fountain filled the silence. "Can we start over?" I looked at him, really looked. The silver hair, the lines around his mouth, the Patek Philippe that suddenly looked like just a watch. "I'm not sure we can start over, but we can start from here, with honesty." He nodded. He didn't reach for me, and I didn't reach for him. We weren't there yet. Maybe we'd never be. "I'll call you," he said, "if you'll answer." "I'll answer." "I don't need you to be the father you weren't, Dad. I need you to be the father you can still become. For Claire." I paused. "Maybe someday, for me." He stayed on the terrace. I walked inside. The distance between us was smaller than it had been that morning, not by much, but enough. Claire caught me in the lobby, halfway to the door. Her cathedral train was bunched over one arm. Her mascara was wrecked. Her veil was gone, lost somewhere between the toast and the CPR, probably trampled under a paramedic's boot. She was grinning like she'd won something bigger than a wedding. "Ev, wait." She pulled a canvas tote bag from behind the coat check counter. She'd hidden it there before the ceremony, she told me later, and pressed it into my hands. "I need to show you something." Inside was a scrapbook, handmade. Thick paper, glue stick edges, the slightly crooked layouts of someone who loved the work more than the result. I opened it. The first page, a local newspaper clipping from 7 years ago. "Unnamed Air Force pilot saves drowning victim at Millstone Bridge." The pilot's name was redacted. Claire had circled the headline in red marker. I turned the pages, printouts from Air Force websites, screenshots of press releases, a photo from a humanitarian service medal ceremony, my promotion to colonel. Someone had underlined the date. A regional news feature about a flood rescue in North Carolina, where I'd commanded the response team. 7 years of collecting. 7 years of watching me from a distance, assembling the life I'd lived without her. The last page, my official USAF portrait. 2 stars, dress uniform, standing in front of the Pavehawk with the 920th Rescue Wing insignia on the tail. Claire had printed it in color, trimmed the edges carefully, and written underneath in her small left slanting handwriting, "My sister, my hero, my phoenix." I cried. For the first time in the story, the first time in front of another person in longer than I can remember. Not weak tears, the tears of a woman who'd finally been seen. Claire held me the way I used to hold her during thunderstorms. "You saved 237 people, Ev." Her voice was muffled against my shoulder. "But tonight, let someone save you for once." I pulled back and looked at her ring. The engraving I'd noticed earlier. Phoenix. My call sign. The word the Air Force gave me because I kept flying into fires and coming back. Claire had engraved it on her wedding band because without me, there was no Claire, no David, no wedding, no any of this. "I've been watching you," she said. "Every mission, every promotion. I was there, Ev, even when you didn't know." I drove home with the windows down. Route 15 at midnight is empty in October. Just headlights and guardrails, and the occasional reflective sign flashing past like a signal flare. The scrapbook sat on the passenger seat, next to Claire's handwritten invitation. 2 pieces of paper that told 2 different stories about the same family. Near Fairfield, I passed the exit for Westport. The house was a quarter-mile off the ramp, the 5-bedroom Tudor, the white fence, the flagstone path where my suitcase had sat 15 years ago. I slowed down. I could see the roofline through the trees, the porch light Gerald always left on. I didn't stop. I used to think home was a place, a house with your name on the mailbox and your photos on the wall. It's not. Home is where they see you, really see you, and for the first time in 15 years, somebody had. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text from Colonel Webb. "How'd it go?" I typed back with one hand, eyes on the road. "Mission accomplished. All personnel accounted for." A smile. My first real one all night. Not the polite one I'd worn at cocktail hour. Not the defiant one I'd aimed at Gerald during his toast. A real smile, small and private, the kind nobody needs to see. My father spent 15 years telling 250 people I was a failure. Tonight, 250 people watched me save a man's life on a dance floor. The truth doesn't need a microphone, it just needs time. I turned on the radio. Something country, something gentle, something about going home. The Ford hummed along the highway. The Connecticut dark closed around me like a curtain, soft and final. I didn't look back. Some people measure success in Patek Philippe watches and Brioni suits. I measure mine in heartbeats. 238 now. 238 heartbeats. That's my number now. If this story made you feel something, if you've ever been the person at table 22 who turned out to be the strongest one in the room, I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the bell. I release stories like this every week. There are more in the description below, including one about a woman who showed up to her ex's company gala with a vacation.